The wind shrieked through the jagged spine of the Rocky Mountains, tearing across the ridges like it had teeth of its own. It clawed at coats, slipped through seams, and laughed in the ears of any man foolish enough to call that land home. Down in the valley, brittle weeds rattled against one another, whispering secrets of hunger and hardship. It was cruel country, the kind that swallowed soft men whole and spat out only bone. Rowan Callahan had lived on that mountain long enough to become part of it. His cabin stood among a thin ring of aspens, 3 miles above the muddy sprawl of Iron Hollow. He had cut every beam with his own hands, stacked every stone in the fireplace, carved every notch in the doorframe. The place was small, quiet, and painfully empty. 5 winters ago, he had buried his wife Eliza and their baby girl Lottie beneath a cottonwood near the stream. Fever came like a thief and left like a tyrant. Since that week, Rowan had trusted only silence. Silence did not die, silence did not betray. Once a month, he rode his mule Clover down the winding trail into Iron Hollow. He bought flour, salt, cartridges, coffee, and sometimes a splash of whiskey to dull memories that pressed too close. He spoke little. Folks let him be. A tall mountain man with haunted eyes and a rifle across his back was not someone you bothered for gossip. That morning, he tied Clover outside Grady's general store, finished his business in near silence, and should have headed home. But habit pulled him toward the Rusted Spur Saloon. The place stank of smoke and spilled beer. Laughter cracked too loud, an out-of-tune piano clanged in the corner. Rowan took his usual seat against the wall, second glass in hand when the shouting began. $20, a drunken voice bellowed. 20 and she's yours. At first, Rowan didn't look. Men sold saddles, horses, rifles when desperate. Then the drunk slurred, strong girl, can cook, clean, good worker, girl. The word struck him like a rifle shot. Slowly, he turned. A gaunt farmer named Clyde Mercer swayed near the poker table. Beside him stood a child no older than 9. Her dress hung loose, once green but now the color of dust. Dark hair framed a face too thin, too tired. She clutched a small cloth bundle to her chest like it was the last thing keeping her upright. "She's mine to sell," Clyde snapped when someone muttered protest. "Can't feed her no more." The room fell silent, Rowan's chest tightened. For a split second, he was no longer in Iron Hollow. He was a boy again, watching his own sister dragged away over gambling debts. Hearing her cry his name, doing nothing. Ha ha ha, how the world laughs at cowards. He had found her years later in a city alley, broken, gone before 20, not again, I'll take her. The words left him before he could swallow them. The saloon froze, Clyde blinked. You what? Rowan stood tall and steady. 20 silver coins clinked onto the bar, nearly all he had. Clyde snatched them without looking at the girl. Done. The child finally lifted her eyes. They were pale blue, terrified. Silent tears clung to her lashes but did not fall. Rowan swallowed hard. Come on. As he led her out into the hard daylight, he felt the entire weight of what he'd done settle onto his shoulders. He had acted on memory and fury. Now he had a child staring up at him and no plan at all. And the mountain does not forgive foolish choices. Before this story climbs higher into the storm, take a second to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in that saloon, because what waits on that mountain will test more than just Rowan's courage. The daylight outside felt too sharp, almost accusing. Rowan loaded flour and coffee into Clover's saddlebags while the girl stood a few steps away, still clutching her bundle. She hadn't spoken, not a single word. The wind tugged at her thin dress, and she swayed with it like she might be carried off if no one held her down. He cleared his throat. You ever ridden a mule? She shook her head. Well, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck, today's your lucky day. The words sounded almost playful, but they fell flat between them. He lifted her carefully. She weighed near nothing. That startled him more than anything else. A child shouldn't feel that light. He settled her onto Clover and adjusted the supplies to give her space. Hold the saddle horn, she's steady, don't worry, don't worry. What a foolish thing to say to a child who had just been sold for $20. They left Iron Hollow behind without looking back. Rowan walked ahead, leading Clover by the reins. For a mile, only the crunch of boots in gravel filled the silence. Then another mile passed. The mountain air grew colder the higher they climbed. At a narrow spring, Rowan stopped. Water, he said simply. The girl slid down, knelt, and drank from her hands. She splashed her face, but her eyes remained watchful, always watching him from beneath dark lashes. "What's your name?" he finally asked. A pause. "Clara," she whispered, so soft the wind nearly stole it. "Clara, my name's Rowan," she nodded once like she was memorizing it for later. He gestured to the bundle. "What you got in there?" She hesitated, her fingers tightened. "Mama's scarf," she said, "and some bread." "When you last eat," a shrug, that shrug twisted something deep in him. He pulled dried venison from his bag and held it out. She stared at it like it might disappear. Slowly she took it and chewed in tiny bites, stretching each second. Ha, like a squirrel hiding food for winter. The trail steepened. Wind whipped harder. Clara began to shiver. Without a word, Rowan removed his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It swallowed her whole. She looked startled but didn't protest. As the sun dipped low, his cabin came into view, a dark square against white snow and black pines. "This is it," he said quietly. "Home." The word hung in the air between them. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and old timber. Rowan lit the fireplace, flames licking upward, chasing away the chill. Orange light flickered across Clara's face, revealing bruised shadows under her eyes he hadn't noticed before. "You take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep by the fire." She didn't move. Instead, she backed slowly into the far corner. Her breathing quickened, her eyes filled with something that made his stomach drop. Fear, not of the mountain, of him. And in that silent cabin, Rowan realized something terrible. He had saved her from one danger. But in her mind, she might have just traded it for another. And what she asks him next will break something he thought had already died. The daylight outside felt too sharp, almost accusing. Rowan loaded flour and coffee into Clover's saddlebags while the girl stood a few steps away, still clutching her bundle. She hadn't spoken, not a single word. The wind tugged at her thin dress, and she swayed with it like she might be carried off if no one held her down. He cleared his throat. "You ever ridden a mule?" She shook her head. "Well," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck, "today's your lucky day." The words sounded almost playful, but they fell flat between them. He lifted her carefully. She weighed near nothing. That startled him more than anything else. A child shouldn't feel that light. He settled her onto Clover and adjusted the supplies to give her space. "Hold the saddle horn. She's steady. Don't worry, don't worry." What a foolish thing to say to a child who had just been sold for $20. They left Iron Hollow behind without looking back. Rowan walked ahead, leading Clover by the reins. For a mile, only the crunch of boots in gravel filled the silence. Then another mile passed. The mountain air grew colder the higher they climbed. At a narrow spring, Rowan stopped. "Water," he said simply. The girl slid down, knelt, and drank from her hands. She splashed her face, but her eyes remained watchful, always watching him from beneath dark lashes. "What's your name?" he finally asked. A pause. "Clara," she whispered, so soft the wind nearly stole it. "Clara, my name's Rowan." She nodded once like she was memorizing it for later. He gestured to the bundle. "What you got in there?" She hesitated, her fingers tightened. "Mama's scarf," she said, "and some bread." "When you last eat," a shrug, that shrug twisted something deep in him. He pulled dried venison from his bag and held it out. She stared at it like it might disappear. Slowly she took it and chewed in tiny bites, stretching each second. Ha, like a squirrel hiding food for winter. The trail steepened. Wind whipped harder. Clara began to shiver. Without a word, Rowan removed his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It swallowed her whole. She looked startled but didn't protest. As the sun dipped low, his cabin came into view, a dark square against white snow and black pines. "This is it," he said quietly. "Home." The word hung in the air between them. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and old timber. Rowan lit the fireplace, flames licking upward, chasing away the chill. Orange light flickered across Clara's face, revealing bruised shadows under her eyes he hadn't noticed before. "You take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep by the fire." She didn't move. Instead, she backed slowly into the far corner. Her breathing quickened, her eyes filled with something that made his stomach drop. Fear, not of the mountain, of him. And in that silent cabin, Rowan realized something terrible. He had saved her from one danger. But in her mind, she might have just traded it for another. And what she asks him next will break something he thought had already died. Rowan froze where he stood. Clara had pressed herself into the far corner, back flat against the wall, her small hands trembling around that worn bundle. The fire crackled between them, throwing shadows that stretched long and uneven across the floor. "Clara," he said gently, lowering his voice until it barely rose above the pop of burning wood. "What are you doing over there?" She didn't answer. Her breathing came shallow, quick, and then he understood. Of course, a drunken father sells you to a stranger. A large man leads you into a lonely cabin high in the mountains. The door shuts. What would she expect next? Rowan slowly lowered himself to the floor so he wouldn't tower over her. He sat cross-legged, palms open on his knees. "I ain't going to hurt you," he said, the words rough but steady. "Not now." Not ever. Her eyes searched his face as if she were measuring truth by the lines carved there. "I had a daughter once," he continued. The words felt heavy, like stones dragged from deep water. "Little Lottie. She didn't get to see her second winter." His voice cracked. He swallowed, tried again. "Fever took her, took my wife too. I couldn't stop it, couldn't fix it." A humorless breath escaped him. Big mountain man, useless against a cough and a burning forehead. Clara blinked. "I bought you," he said quietly, "because I've seen what happens when no one steps in." Her voice finally came, small as falling ash. "Are you gonna sell me too?" The question hit harder than any fist. For a second he couldn't breathe. Then something inside him, something locked tight for 5 long years, split open. He covered his face with one rough hand, but the sound tore out anyway. A broken sound, deep, shaking, not quiet tears, but the kind that bend a man forward and leave him gasping. Ha ha ha, the mountain man crying like a lost boy. He didn't try to hide it. "No," he forced out between breaths. "Never, you hear me, never." Silence followed, only the fire speaking. Slowly, Clara eased away from the wall. She didn't come close, but she wasn't pressed flat anymore. "You can have the bed," she whispered. "The bed's yours," he answered firmly. "Every night. I usually sleep in the barn," she murmured like it was nothing. Rowan closed his eyes briefly, fighting down a surge of anger so sharp it tasted bitter. "You'll never sleep in a barn again," he said. "Not while you're under my roof." She studied him one more long moment. Then hesitantly she crossed the room. Each step seemed like it cost her something. She touched the quilt like it might vanish, then climbed in fully dressed, bundles still clutched tight. Rowan turned his back deliberately and spread his blanket near the fire. "Doors barred," he said softly. "No one's coming in." Outside, wolves began to howl. Clara flinched. "Just wolves," he said. "They won't come near the fire. Papa said they'd eat me if I ran away." Rowan stared into the flames. "Your papa said a lot of things that weren't true." After a long while her breathing slowed. She slept. Rowan did not. He sat there watching the rise and fall of her small shoulders, feeling something shift in his chest. He had promised, and the mountain has a way of testing promises. By morning, that promise will face its first trial. Snow fell sometime in the night. Rowan noticed it first through the silence. The world had gone still, the kind of still that comes after a fresh blanket settles over everything. When he opened the door at dawn, white stretched in every direction. The trees sagged heavy, the sky hung low and gray. Behind him, Clara stirred. For a moment she looked confused, as if she didn't recognize the cabin. Then memory returned and her body stiffened. Rowan gave her space. "Morning," he said, pouring water into a tin cup. "Snow means extra work." She slid from the bed carefully, still watching him from the corner of her eye. He handed her the cup. She hesitated, then took it. That tiny act felt bigger than the mountain. They stepped outside together, cold bit at their cheeks. Rowan handed her a small shovel. "We clear the steps first, always clear your way out." She nodded seriously and began scraping snow, awkward at first. The shovel dragged sideways, snow sprayed into her boots. Rowan almost chuckled, almost. By the third try she adjusted her grip. By the fifth she found rhythm. "Ha ha ha, stubborn thing." Inside he showed her how to bank the fire properly. "You keep kindling dry, fire dies, we freeze." "I won't let it die," she said quickly. Something fierce flashed in her eyes. Later he set beans to simmer and watched her move around the cabin, still cautious, still quiet, but no longer pressed into corners. After breakfast, he brought out a small hatchet. "You ever split wood?" She shook her head. "Today you learn." He demonstrated slowly, careful with every motion. When she took the hatchet, it looked too large in her thin hands. She raised it, brought it down, missed, her jaw tightened again, the blade struck true. The wood cracked clean down the middle, her eyes widened. Rowan gave a single nod. Good, a small smile flickered across her face, quick and startled, like she hadn't meant to let it happen. That smile did something dangerous to him. It warmed places he had sealed shut. By afternoon, her palms were red and blistered. She didn't complain, not once. That night, Rowan rubbed grease into her hands and wrapped them in cloth. "They'll toughen," she said quietly, studying his scarred fingers. "Like yours." "In time," he replied. "Everything takes time." As darkness fell, wind howled again around the cabin. Clara looked toward the door, fear flickering back. Rowan reached for his rifle and leaned it beside the hearth where she could see it. "You're safe," he said. She nodded. But later, as they sat in firelight, she asked something that made his heart pound. "If my papa comes, will you send me back?" The fire popped loudly between them. Rowan met her eyes, and this time there was no hesitation in his answer. But the truth he's about to speak will bind their fates tighter than either of them realizes. Rowan didn't look away. "If your papa comes," he said slowly, each word firm as stone, "he won't be taking you anywhere." Clara studied him, searching for cracks in his promise. "You mean that? I don't say things I don't mean." The wind pressed hard against the cabin walls, as if testing that vow already. Days turned into weeks. Snow melted along the edges of the clearing, revealing patches of stubborn earth beneath. Clara began learning the mountain the way Rowan had, through patience and scraped knuckles. He taught her how to read tracks near the stream. "See here," he said one morning, kneeling beside a set of prints. "Rabbit, small." Light, she crouched beside him, eyes sharp. "And this one?" she asked, pointing to a deeper mark. "Deer," he answered, "heavier, hooves press in clean." She nodded, absorbing every detail like dry ground drinking rain. "What about that?" she asked again, finger hovering near a broad print with claw marks. Rowan's expression tightened. "Black bear, probably young. Will it come here? Only if it's hungry." Clara's chin lifted slightly. "Then we don't let it get hungry near us." Ha ha ha, bold little thing. He showed her how to set snares, how to keep her back to a tree when listening, how to move quietly without snapping twigs. She learned fast, too fast. As if survival wasn't new to her. One afternoon, he placed the small .22 rifle in her hands. She stiffened at the weight. "Easy," he murmured, adjusting her stance. "Breathe out, squeeze, don't jerk." The first shot went wide. Birds scattered from the trees. She blinked but didn't flinch. Again, closer, again, the can tipped over. Her face lit up before she caught herself. A burst of pride slipped through, bright and alive. "I did it, you did," Rowan replied, unable to stop the hint of warmth in his voice. That night, while she cleaned the rifle carefully as instructed, she glanced up at him. "Why didn't you have another family?" The question hit softer than the last one, but deeper. Rowan stared into the fire. "Didn't think I deserved one," he admitted. Clara frowned slightly. "That's foolish." He let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. "Maybe." For the first time, the silence between them felt comfortable, not heavy, not sharp, but the mountain doesn't let peace settle long. 2 mornings later, while Rowan checked traps beyond the ridge, a single gunshot echoed from the direction of the cabin. One shot, clear, sharp. Rowan's blood turned cold, and he ran. Rowan ran like the mountain itself was chasing him. Branches tore at his coat. Snow gave way under his boots. His lungs burned, but he didn't slow. That single shot echoed in his skull over and over again. One shot, Clara. He burst into the clearing, rifle already raised. Clara stood on the porch. Alive, smoke curled from the barrel of her .22. Her hands trembled, but her stance remained steady. Across the yard, a young black bear stumbled backward near the root cellar, confused and snorting. It had clawed at the wooden hatch, splintering the edge. "I fired over its head," Clara called out, voice shaking but controlled. "Just like you said." The bear huffed once more, then crashed back into the trees. Rowan's knees nearly gave out from relief. He lowered his rifle slowly and crossed the yard in long strides. "You did right," he said, breathing hard. "You kept your head." Up close, he could see how pale she'd gone. "I was scared," she admitted, jaw tight. "Good," Rowan replied. "Fear keeps you sharp." Her lips twitched. "You always say that, and I always mean it." Inside, the claw marks on the cellar door told the full story. Another minute, maybe less, and the winter stores would have been torn apart. Clara had acted, not frozen, not hidden, acted. That night they sat close to the fire. The cabin felt smaller somehow, like danger had leaned its shoulder against the walls and tested them. Would you have shot it? She asked quietly. If it came for you, Rowan didn't hesitate. Yes, she absorbed that. He saw something shift behind her eyes, something steadier, stronger. But as the fire burned low, wind picked up again outside. A long, rising howl carried through the dark. Clara stiffened. Rowan rose slowly and barred the door tighter. "They're early this year," he muttered. The next howl came closer, then another answered from the ridge, wolves. By midnight, scratching scraped along the outer wall. A low growl vibrated through the floorboards. Clara was already out of bed, rifle in hand. "I can help," she whispered. Rowan looked at her, really looked. The frightened child from the saloon was fading. In her place stood someone forged by cold and promise. "All right," he said quietly, "but you do exactly as I say." The door shuddered under sudden weight. The wolves were no longer circling, they were testing, and this winter siege would prove whether their fragile little family could survive more than just memory. The first slam against the door rattled the iron latch. Clara flinched, but she didn't step back. Rowan moved beside her, calm and deliberate. "Windows," he murmured, "we hold from inside." Another heavy thud struck the wood. A snarl followed, low and hungry. Through the frost-glazed glass, yellow eyes glowed in the darkness. Clara swallowed hard. "On my count," Rowan said. They moved to opposite sides of the cabin. Rowan positioned himself at the front window. Clara stood near the side, just as he had taught her. 1, 2, 3, two shots cracked through the night. The wolves scattered briefly, paws crunching through snow, but they didn't retreat far. They paced the clearing, circling just beyond the firelight. "They'll test again," Rowan muttered, and they did. For 3 nights the wolves returned. They clawed at the woodpile. They snapped at the corners of the shed. Once one leapt high enough to rake its claws across the roof. Clara stayed steady. Once, when Rowan dashed out to drag in extra logs, a wolf lunged from behind the stacked timber. Clara fired at the snow near its paws. The blast startled it enough for Rowan to dive back inside. "Good shot," he barked, breathless. Her hands shook afterward, but she lifted her chin. "I didn't miss." Hahuha's stubborn as winter. Food thinned, the woodpile shrank faster than Rowan liked. And then the blizzard came. It arrived screaming. Wind howled down the canyon like something alive. Snow struck sideways, slamming against the cabin in waves. The walls creaked. The roof groaned. Inside, they wrapped themselves in blankets near the fire. "Tell me about summer," Clara whispered, her voice barely steady over the storm. Rowan spoke of green valleys, of trout flashing silver in streams, of wildflowers bursting purple and yellow across the slopes. He kept talking until her breathing slowed, until her shivering eased. The storm raged all night. By morning, silence returned, thick and unnatural. Snow reached halfway up the windows. They dug their way out together. "This mountain wants us gone," Clara muttered under her breath. Rowan leaned on his shovel, studying the endless white. Then it picked the wrong two, but the mountain wasn't finished. 2 days later, while checking trap lines in waist-deep snow, Rowan's vision blurred. Hunger, exhaustion, cold, his knees buckled. The last thing he saw was White rushing up to meet him, and he did not wake when he hit the ground. Not until Clara's small hands were dragging him through the snow. And what she does next will prove that the little girl he bought for $20 is stronger than anyone ever imagined. When Rowan opened his eyes, the world felt far away. The ceiling above him flickered orange, firelight. His chest burned with each breath. His limbs felt heavy, like someone had filled his bones with stone. He tried to move, couldn't. Then he saw her. Clara sat beside him on the floor, back against the bed, eyes red from exhaustion. A tin cup rested in her hands. "You're awake," she breathed, and the relief in her voice cracked like ice breaking on a river. He tried to speak, but only managed a rasp. She leaned forward quickly, lifting his head the way he had shown her when someone was weak. "Drink," she ordered softly, tipping pine needle tea to his lips. The liquid was bitter and hot. He swallowed. "You weren't supposed to follow," he croaked, her jaw tightened. "You said stay inside," her voice trembled, "but you didn't come back." Outside, wind whispered against the cabin walls, softer now. "You dragged me?" he asked. She nodded once. "How?" A small shrug. "You're not as heavy as you think." how he had bold even when terrified, but he saw it then, the thin coat wrapped around her instead of him, the blankets piled over his chest. The wood stacked high near the hearth, she had given him everything. You used the last of the venison, he murmured, noticing the empty hook near the shelf. She looked away. You needed it. And you, I've been hungry before. The words hit him like a blow. For 2 days she had fed him scraps, forced tea past his lips, kept the fire alive, all while going without. He reached for her hand. She hesitated only a second before letting him take it. You saved me, he said quietly, her eyes filled, shining bright in the firelight. You said we survived together. He let out a weak breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Guess I did. She tried to smile, but tears spilled anyway. Silent, stubborn tears she wiped away with the heel of her palm. I thought you were gonna die, she whispered. He squeezed her fingers. Not that easy to get rid of me. The next morning, Rowan could sit upright. By the end of the week, he stood again. They had survived the winter, barely. Snow began to soften, light lingered longer in the sky. Green pushed through stubborn earth, but as strength returned to Rowan's body, a different storm gathered below the mountain. On their first trip back to Iron Hollow, whispers followed them down the muddy street, and one name floated through the air like poison: Marcus Doyle, a man who dealt in promises and children. And he was claiming Clara had been promised to him before Rowan ever stepped into that saloon. The mountain had tested them, now the valley would, and the valley plays dirtier than wolves. Rowan felt the shift the moment they entered Iron Hollow. Conversations dipped, eyes lingered. Clara walked close to his side, her hand brushing his coat but not quite holding it. She felt it too. Inside Grady's store, old Mr. Grady avoided Rowan's gaze at first. That alone told him enough. Say it, Rowan muttered. Grady sighed heavily. Marcus Doyle's back. The name tasted foul. Clara stiffened beside him. He's claiming Clyde owed him, Grady continued. Says the girl was part of the arrangement, says you interfered with a lawful agreement. Lawful? Rowan's voice sharpened. Selling a child like cattle, Grady lowered his tone. You know how Doyle works. He talks sweet in front of officials, dirty in the dark. Clara's fingers curled into Rowan's sleeve now. They stepped outside, and there he was. Marcus Doyle leaned against the saloon post, polished boots, slick smile. His coat was too fine for a town like this. His eyes were too cold for anywhere. Well now, Doyle called smoothly. Mountain man, Rowan didn't answer. Doyle's gaze slid to Clara. There she is. Clara's grip tightened. You bought something that wasn't yours to buy, Doyle continued lazily. Clyde owed me. The girl was collateral. She's not property, Rowan said evenly. Doyle chuckled. Everything's property if someone signs the paper. There was no paper. There was a promise. Rowan stepped forward, slow and steady. You don't come near her, Doyle's smile thinned. Or what? For a heartbeat, the street felt like a powder keg. Then Doyle adjusted his cuffs casually. No need for drama. We'll settle it proper. Town council hearing, sheriff present. His eyes flicked to Clara again. If she's truly safe with you, you've nothing to fear. He tipped his hat and walked off. Clara exhaled shakily. That night, Rowan barred the cabin door twice. 2 days later, 3 riders climbed the trail: Sheriff Dalton, Reverend Hale, and Isaac Turner from the council. Clara stood straighter than Rowan had ever seen her. Inside the cabin, the air felt tight. Mr. Callahan, the Reverend began gently, there are claims that the child was part of a prior agreement. She was being sold for whiskey money, Rowan replied flatly. Doyle arrived last, polite, smiling, poison wrapped in silk. I had plans for her education, Doyle said smoothly. Work in the city, a future. Clara's face went pale, then she stepped forward. Her voice shook at first but didn't break. He told Papa I was valuable, she said. Said girls my age make good money in certain houses. The room went still. Sheriff Dalton's jaw tightened. Doyle's smile vanished. You lie, he snapped. I don't, Clara whispered, but her eyes burned bright. Rowan felt something fierce rise in his chest. The sheriff turned slowly toward Doyle. You got proof of this agreement? Silence. For once, Marcus Doyle had no paper. No witness willing to speak for him. And sometimes, even in a crooked valley, truth cuts deeper than silver. But Doyle wasn't the kind of man who walked away quietly. As he left, he paused at the door. This ain't finished, he said softly, and the way he said it made the fire in Rowan's hearth feel suddenly very small. The hearing was held 3 days later in the small wooden church at the edge of Iron Hollow. Every bench was filled. Rowan stood tall near the front, wearing the only clean shirt he owned. Clara stood beside him in her simple blue dress, hands folded tight but chin lifted. Marcus Doyle looked polished and composed, as if he were attending a social gathering instead of fighting for ownership of a child. Ownership, the word alone made Rowan's jaw tighten. Sheriff Dalton called the meeting to order. Doyle spoke first, smooth as oil. Clyde Mercer owed me a considerable debt. The child was promised as repayment. Mr. Callahan interfered. Promised, Rowan muttered under his breath. Then Clara was asked to speak. She stepped forward slowly. The entire room seemed to lean closer. Mr. Doyle used to visit our farm, she said, voice soft but steady. He brought whiskey, told Papa I was worth money, said girls like me could work in the city. A murmur spread through the church. Clara swallowed but continued. He said I wouldn't need to worry about food again, that men would pay. The words landed heavy. Doyle's face darkened. She's been coached enough, Sheriff Dalton cut in sharply. Then something unexpected happened. Old Mrs. Bennett stood from the back pew. I saw Doyle talking to Clyde last winter, she said loudly. He bragged about sending girls east before. Another voice joined, then another. Whispers turned into statements. Doyle's polished mask cracked. He had operated in shadows, but the light was suddenly very bright. Sheriff Dalton stepped forward. You got documentation? Doyle hesitated. That was all it took. The sheriff's voice hardened. Without proof, this claim holds no standing, and given the testimonies here, I'd advise you leave town. For once, Marcus Doyle had nothing clever to say. He adjusted his coat stiffly, eyes cold as river ice. This place will regret siding with a mountain hermit. Rowan met his stare without blinking. Try us. Doyle walked out alone. Silence hung in the church, then relief swept through like a warm wind. Clara turned to Rowan. Her eyes shimmered, but this time not with fear. Does this mean? Rowan knelt so they were level. It means, he said quietly, voice thick, you're staying exactly where you belong. She launched into his arms without hesitation. For the first time, she didn't hold back, and he didn't either. Papa, she whispered against his shoulder. The word broke him and rebuilt him in the same breath. Outside, the mountain stood tall and unchanging. But inside Rowan Callahan's chest, something had shifted forever. He had gone into that saloon with no plan. He had spent nearly every coin he owned. He had taken on wolves, winter, hunger, and men far uglier than any storm. And he would do it all again. Because love, fierce, stubborn, mountain-strong love is worth more than silver. And in a world that tries to price children like cattle, some men choose to pay everything. The mountain wind howled that evening as they climbed home together, but this time it didn't sound lonely. It sounded like laughter carried on the air.